Good morning, everybody. Jordan Daly, right back to y'all with the sports topics for the day. I'm actually was not planning on doing a sports topic today, but I got pulled into an impromptu debate with one of my Facebook friends, so I said, why not go ahead and do it while it's fresh on my brain? So today it's the never-ending, never-ceasing debate between LeBron James and Michael Jordan. And one of the most important things to keep in context when you're talking about these two great players, these two Mount Rushmore players, is that you're not doing the comparison in a vacuum. So it's a lot more than just A versus B. You have to take into account the era, which is very important because the style of the game, the rules of the game has significantly changed over time. So that's one of the reasons that it's hard to compare the two in a vacuum. There's a lot of different variables and factors that go into it. So I'm going to try to keep all of that in mind as I run down my list of arguments for both. Um, so one of the biggest arguments that I hear against LeBron James playing in Michael Jordan's era was that he would not be able to handle the physicality of the dominant centers and dominant wing defenders, period, during that time. Now, I used to just accept that at face value, but then when I really started to watch a lot of film from Michael Jordan's era, I'm like, you telling me LeBron wouldn't be able to survive that? People forget, man. LeBron James is 6'8". Some people give him 6'9". About 265 pounds is his catch weight. He's played as heavy as 275 during his last year in Miami. So, when you talk about the dominant centers of Michael Jordan's era, LeBron's bigger than a lot of these guys. And then you also have to take into account that during the 90s, the three-point line wasn't as prevalent. It was there, but they didn't use it to their advantage as much. LeBron James in today's game he's a good three-point shooter. Back in the 90s, he would have been one of the best. Outside of the snipers like Steve Kerr and BJ Armstrong and Mark Price, LeBron would have been the best shooter on the floor from distance. So at about 36%. 36% back then was excellent. Today it's middle of the road since everybody shoots it. So when you take into account a guy as big as LeBron James who can stretch the floor and shoot, now all of a sudden driving lanes are wide open, which plays directly into his hands. So he starts driving towards the bucket. Even though defenses were more physical, he's either going to get the bucket or the foul or both oftentimes. Um, I was watching an interview with Michael Jordan the other day. I watch a lot of Michael Jordan interviews. My dad has a lot of his old games on tape on VHS. Um, and they asked him who his toughest defender was, or who he could think of off the top of his head. And he said Joe Dumars from the Detroit Pistons. Shout out to my Detroit fans, especially my man Elliot Holmes. I'm gonna start charging you guys for shout outs. I'm playing. Um, but for y'all that don't know, if you're not a basketball aficionado, Joe Dumars was about 6 foot, 6'1", 175 pounds, maybe 180 if you want to be generous. Just for context, Steph Curry, who in a lot of playoff series is a defensive liability, they go at him specifically in the pick and roll because he's not a great defender, because of his size mostly. Steph Curry is 6'3", 190. Okay, so Michael Jordan's toughest defender is smaller than Steph Curry. Context is everything. Also, stretch players, stretch threes and fours like Kawhi Leonard, Paul George, Kevin Durant were non-existent during that era. You had guys that were that size, but they did not have the shooting prowess of guys like today. So again, you introduce a skill set which is necessary in today's game, shooting from distance especially. You introduce that to Michael Jordan's era. Like I said, you stretch out the floor, you create more driving lanes. So all of a sudden, the clogged up, clanky, clunky game during the 90s, the floor is a lot more wide open. And back then, they weren't used to a 7 foot guy who could step out and hit a shot, you know what I mean, from anywhere outside the paint. So when you factor that in, it's important. We've all been to the park. Y'all see me looking at my notes here back and forth. We've all been to the park at least once and seen guys that are hacking, fouling, not letting you come across the lane. There's no easy layups, no easy buckets. Great. Classic game, right? But I'm sure when you watch that game from the sidelines, you kind of sit back and say, they're just fouling. There's nothing special about what they're doing. They're just fouling me coming across the lane every time. Sorry to say, and I'm apologizing to my old heads here because I'm not disrespecting the game at all. I have mad respect for the game in any era. Um, but just because you get to foul a lot doesn't make your brand of basketball or your era of basketball any better. It makes it a little bit more physical, yes. Um, but that doesn't necessarily translate to better. You know what I'm saying? I definitely think that stars today have been pampered because, like Stephen A. Smith likes to say, you breathe on a guy, you could get called for a foul. But I don't think somebody as big as LeBron James would have a hard time translating his game to Michael Jordan's era. He would have been the biggest player on the floor a lot of the times. You know what I mean? So just like I feel Michael Jordan would have adjusted easily to today's game, my goodness, in an era where you can't touch anybody, he might average 45 in a down year. You know what I mean? Because you can't touch anybody. Um, I definitely think that it goes both ways, though. LeBron James would have no problem playing during the 90s.